In this lesson, we'll take a look at some features that can help you frame your shot up a little bit better. Alright, so as you start to get a little bit further into rendering and begin working with some of your own scenes, you may find that occasionally you have some difficulty getting a really nice framing on certain objects, especially if you need to have your scene framed up in a very particular way. So, for example, we can see that within this perspective view, we have the spheres that are framed up pretty well. We have quite a bit of space at the top and the bottom of our view. So you can see there's quite a bit of this empty space. Now, if we were to come in and render this out, again, just pressing Shift Q on the keyboard, you'll notice that the area that gets rendered out does not actually match up very well. So you can see, again, where we have a lot of space at the top and at the bottom within the viewport, you can see this is actually being cropped in pretty close once we actually render this out. Right, so how can we make sure that the renderable area is very precisely placed in case we have to have something that's matched up really particular? Well, within this perspective view, what we can do is just click on this perspective caption, and if we scroll down, we can turn on the Show Safe Frames. So as soon as we turn that on, what this will actually do is allow us to now see the viewable, or rather the renderable area of our scene. So now what we should see is if we were to come in and let's say we place this sphere perfectly up in this corner. So let's say we needed this to be framed up in a very precise way. And now if we re-render this, you can see that is exactly what we get. So really useful feature, and I always make it a habit of turning this feature on, especially when it comes time to rendering and getting my shot framed up. Right, now another thing that we can actually start to do whenever it comes to framing up our shot is take advantage of some of the zooming features that we have within 3ds Max. So typically, if we were to press Control Alt and then middle click, what we're actually doing is dollying the camera back and forth. So this is the same as actually taking the camera itself and actually pulling it away from the subject. And you can see that there's a definite viewport or a perspective change as we start to pull this camera in and out. Now what we can also do is basically zoom the camera in. So if we were to pull the camera back and then use this field of view tool down at the bottom, see we can activate that. My cursor changes a little bit, and now as I click and drag from side to side or up and down, what this is essentially doing is pretty much doing the same thing as attaching a very strong telephoto lens to your camera. The camera itself is staying in the exact same position. All we're doing is now zooming in using a very strong zoom effect. Right, now when I say the term camera, that's really not appropriate for this perspective view because within 3ds Max there's actually a pretty significant difference between the camera view and the perspective view. Right, now we can actually create a camera within 3ds Max. The quickest and easiest way that I find to do this is to be looking through your perspective view and then go to Views and then Create Camera from View, or just use the keyboard shortcut, which is Control-C. So if you do that, it looks like really nothing at all has changed. But now if you look very closely, we can see we're no longer looking through the perspective viewport. This is now labeled Camera 001. So if we were to come in, and again use Alt-W to collapse this down, you can see now we have a new camera object that's in our scene. And really one of the telltale signs that you'll notice whenever working with a camera or viewing through it is that when it comes to actually moving around, it's now quite a bit different. You'll notice if I were to Alt, or rather just middle click and pan from side to side, we can still do that. But now if I Alt middle click to try to orbit around, you'll notice that really doesn't work anymore. At least whenever looking through a camera. So whenever looking through a camera, and if we want to begin working with this and redirecting this, we can start to use a few of these different features like the roll camera. So you'll notice the roll will actually sort of twist the camera in space. Right, we can also come in and use this orbit camera. So now you'll notice again my cursor changes, and now I can actually start to move this camera around. Now you notice that as I start to orbit around, it's really not matching up very well with what I have in my scene. That's because this camera is using what's called a target. So if we were to zoom in a little bit tighter, you'll notice that this camera is actually orbiting around this target, this little blue square that's right in front of it. All right, so as opposed to actually using the orbit camera tool to move around, another feature that we could also use is to just simply grab our move tool, grab that target of the camera, and simply start to pull it and move it around. And you'll notice that's pretty much doing the same thing. Right? Except instead of actually moving the camera itself, which is what we're doing with the Orbit camera tool, now we're actually leaving the camera stationary and just moving the actual target that it's connected to. Right, now when it comes to using this camera, we can actually start to make some really nice modifications to this. So if we select this and go into the modifier panel, we can come in and start to adjust things like the lens. So we can start to adjust the field of view. This is pretty much going to do the exact same thing as using the zoom tool within the camera itself. Or I should say this is actually the same as using the field of view tool. So you'll notice as we use the field of view, start to pull this back and forth, it's doing the exact same thing as adjusting these values. Now, this dolly camera, which is actually right above it, is actually doing something a little bit different. You notice this is actually leaving the target itself in the same spot, and it's using this field of view. It's pretty much leaving that exactly the same. The only difference is it's now pulling that camera in a little bit tighter. So with this, you can start to get some nice forced perspective and things like that. Right, we can also come in and start to match up these particular lenses. So if you're trying to match something up that is maybe been shot with a real camera and you're trying to do some match moving and some compositing work, and you need to match up the camera on your lens or the lens on your Max camera to some kind of a real world lens, we have a few to pick from. All right, so really a lot of the same functionality that we can get using the perspective view. The thing is, just with the camera, it's sometimes a little bit easier to get some more precise settings, and we do have some additional controls as far as being able to very precisely control the exact target of our camera. And now we actually have a definite camera position that we can start to, again, just kind of get a little bit more of a real-world type of an effect. Right, and we can choose to render through this as well. All we have to do is go back into our rendered frame window and just set the viewport to the appropriate camera and re-render. Right, so that's a quick look at how we can start to use cameras within 3ds Max.